Hey, what's up, everyone? It's DRW here with the Hot Take of the Day podcast, and today we're going to be talking California oil and gas, amongst a whole bunch of other things. I have Chad Hathaway of Hathaway Oil and Gas joining us, and am I right? You would live in Bakersfield, California, at the present time?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I am in Bakersfield. I'm born and raised here.
And so I have never been to Bakersfield, but I've heard stories over the years about just the town and oil field, and you're in the heart of California. Talk to me about growing up in Bakersfield and having an oil company in Bakersfield. Like, I thought it was bad in Boulder when you go see people, but I can't imagine what it's like in California. So welcome to the show,
Sure.
and Chad, give me some stories.
Yeah, no problem. So Bakersfield is like the Nashville. We have two Wests that we're referred to: Nashville West and Midland West. And so we're very similar. I'd say, with mountains and everything. We're geographically located about an hour and 45 minutes north of Los Angeles. But Kern County produces about 75 to 80% of all the oil produced in California, and that's where we're at. So we're just a really cool. Ag is also a backbone here. We're one of the leading ag counties also in the nation. So we have quite a bit of ag here all around us here in the oil fields of Kern County too. So it was great. I grew up as part of an oil family. My great grandfather actually was an oil producer in California down in the LA Basin. So, back in the days, I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, There Will Be Blood. But there's a lot of ties to Kern County and also to the LA Basin in that movie. So, we are an oil-driven economy. Like 7 of the top 10 taxpayers here in Kern County are oil companies. So the whole community really kind of, it thrives and it dies all based on the oil and gas industry here. Even though we do have a big ag present, they're not the big taxpayers here. So we have a pretty strong political base. We also have the California State Republican leader, not California State Republican. Yeah, she does. She lives here, and also the minority leader of the United States Congress, Kevin McCarthy, lives here too as well. So we have a pretty, out of a mostly blue state, we're a really red county.
So a lot of things to dig in there. Now, the LA Basin, is that the basin where the man-made islands are sort of in the coast where
Yeah.
they have a tremendous amount of oil production? I mean, the thing that's so amazing to me is people forget that in LA there's buildings built around pumping units, and that the California oil fields are so old. When was the first well in Kern County drilled?
We are the first. It goes back to the late 1800s. California, actually, oil was used here several hundred years ago. We had multiple seeps throughout California, but some of the early Indian tribes used oil to coat their canoes and also use it for various types of lubricating materials for whatever they needed in their way of life. But LA has got a lot of oil. It's actually one of the greatest basins, I think, in the United States. But unfortunately, most of the real estate there has consumed all of that, and oil no longer really does really well in that urban environment. In fact, it's very difficult to operate in Los Angeles. But the islands you talked about are actually really cool. They're off the coast of Long Beach, and the company that owns it put these incredible decorative lights on it. So you look out on this island and you think, wow, what is this like? Every day it looks like kind of like a shopping mall when it's lit up at night. It's just beautiful, and it's actually in a drilling island that's got hundreds, if not thousands, of wells that are all throughout it.
It is really crazy when you talk about the urban environment to think about the number of oil and gas fields, like the Barnett Shale really being in Dallas-Fort Worth. And when you think about the DJ Basin is Denver, Weld County, Greeley, just continuous. And obviously Bakersfield, you've seen the pictures there, and Los Angeles. It is amazing if you think about the population density and the way things have changed in the last 30 years. If those basins were discovered today, there's just zero chance that they would ever be developed, and the U.S. would have been substantially short, because California produces around 450,000 barrels a day, primarily conventional. Do you want to talk about the types of plays that you have, the types of developments and the opportunities in the Kern Basin right now?
Yeah, so we call it the San Joaquin Valley, San Joaquin Basin. That's pretty much everything north of Los Angeles. But yeah, we have predominantly almost 100% all conventional fields. So what we see here, a lot of our production is heavy oil, and a lot of it's thermal based. So We have a lot of thermal EOR that we utilize here. So you don't have the fracking influence here. You don't have the unconventional booms here. Most of these oil fields are over 100 years old. Some of them are still doing, incredible rates that they did 40, 50 years ago. So we've got relatively low flat decline curves on most of our fields. As far as opportunities are concerned, we operate about 260 wells here in eastern Kern County. We're just what they call stripper well operators. So we operate 3 to 5 barrel a day wells. Most of them have very little decline curve at all. And it's all a game of economics and surviving the regulatory environment here as well. So what we like to say and like to pride ourselves on here in California is that we are kind of at the tip of the regulatory spear. The birth of the environmental movement was here in California. So we've been operating here at regulatory levels that nobody has seen ever in the country, and that's what you see shifting towards Colorado and other places in the country, where they're becoming kind of newer exposed to these types of regulations. Well, we've been dealing with it for decades, and so I think that we like to pride ourselves as Californians when it comes to oil production. We like to think that we do it in probably the most environmentally friendly manner or the most heavily regulated manner on the planet. California, many people don't know this, but we import, over 65% of our crude here. So we don't have any internal pipelines, crude pipelines coming into California. So it's really interesting that we have to import so much oil from places that don't share our same values. And so that's one of the conversations we're always trying to have with people who are unreasonable, who don't want to talk about pathways or don't want to allow us to be stakeholders in the state's energy production climate. You're importing oil, and we're importing millions of barrels of oil into California every year that comes from places that do not share the same values that we share in California. And so we're constantly fighting that battle.
And if I recall correctly, because of the lack of pipeline capacity, I think both on the natural gas side, but particularly in the oil side, is one of the reasons that oil trades at a premium to WTI, right? California barrels are quite premiumly priced. So during the downturn, what kind of spot prices were you seeing in the California basins?
Yeah, so it fluctuates. So it's interesting. We for a long time we carried a premium to WTI, and we're always really proud of that. We got the best, highest priced oil in the country. But when the Saudi-Russia dispute fell out and Saudi started flooding the market in the U.S., we had I remember at one time it was like 20 million barrels parked off the coast of California. So we've seen recently a dip in our pricing below WTI. And so we didn't quite go negative like you saw on that short-term basis, but we had an oversupply of tankers, mostly from Saudi off the coast of California, and they're still driving down the price. As we work through that inventory, we hopefully will get back to where we were. But I mean, the refining capacity in California, it depends on imported barrels. And so that's what we always say, like, why are we continuously hammering the guys that are here that are following the rules and gals here that are following the rules when you're bringing it in from places like Ecuador and Saudi Arabia that they just don't share our same values. They don't share our same values for the environment, for human rights, for civil rights. These are all things that we don't believe in here, but we're still enriching them and paying them top dollar for their oil. So it sucks. You're in a hypocrisy sometimes.
So when you talk about stripper wells at 3 barrels a day, and a lot of people will say, the shale revolution was a Ponzi scheme. It really hurt the American oil and gas industry, primarily because debt was used to grow production, which has depressed prices, as we've seen. Right. And my pushback to that is always, well, we've been producing conventional oil like in California since the late 1800s. We've been producing it in Pennsylvania. We've been producing it in Texas. And all the kind of conventional oil is gone. And that 3 barrel a day stripper wells, the OPEX on that, you have to be, really, really careful. Talk about your operational philosophy and, shut-ins versus not, and how conventional oil and geothermal oil and EOR oil is different than perhaps some of the oil people would be familiar with.
Yeah, no, EOR is, there's multiple forms of EOR. There's gas injection, there's water flooding. Out here, we're really big on thermal enhanced EOR. So you've got, I don't necessarily agree wholeheartedly that all of the conventional oil is gone. I think that you'll see some of our recovery factors on the lighter oil side here in California, where we don't have CO2 floods and where we don't have what you have in West Texas. there's still a substantial amount of oil left in the ground. So we have a lot of room for more EOR here. And if you go back to when steam was first invented and kind of proven by Shell back in the days here in the 60s in California, you saw, oil fields recovery factors, like typically you'll recover between 10 and 20% of what oil is left in place. We see recovery factors in a thermal EOR oil field as high as 80, 90%. So that's an incredibly efficient job. Like Chevron, for example, in the Kern River oil field and in parts of the Midway Sunset oil field have seen, 60, 70, 80, 90%. And in a good gravity drainage scenario, almost as much as 100% when you start draining your neighbor on a good EOR steam flood. So we haven't seen all of the potential EOR opportunities exploited here in California. So I do think there's a lot of conventional life left. I think when you look at economics for us, it's very simple. We know what we control. Luckily that we're of enough size where we can hedge and we can use derivatives. But the bottom line is really what we focus on a lot. In California, a company by the name of Era years ago pioneered implementing lean in the oil fields. And so I don't know if you're familiar with lean, but lean is the study that Toyota used to actually eliminate waste in their business.
Right, like so Sigma 6 stuff is how some other people would refer to it a little bit?
Some call it Lean Sigma 6, but some also just look at it as a study of waste, like actually being able to have a process and run a scheduled business. And so these are the things that basically we look at here. We try to pride ourselves in being a manufacturing business. We try to pride ourselves in the scheduling. And I think those are all things that we have implemented and had to live by for a long time here because our margins are small. If we can make a living on a 1 to 3 barrel a day well, and it makes sense for us, I mean, that isn't as cool as a well that IPs for 1,000 barrels a day, but that's a long, long life cycle of cash flow. So we also have to become I know my company has become way more self-sufficient than most. I mean, we have our own service rigs, so we have our own workover rigs. We handle our own trucking. We have our own equipment business that supplies equipment to the business, so we don't have to go out and rent it. So we have to do a lot of that ourselves, versus a major has a big suite of contractors that they rely on. We have to be more nimble and have to be able to handle those things on our own. And also with labor too, we have to be smart and understand where we should hire and where we shouldn't hire. And also be nimble enough to adjust to any kind of price fluctuations as well.
What do you think about that fully integrated model? I wrote a post about 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago now, on Unit. And Unit was really the only company that had an upstream and a drilling and a midstream. And obviously midstream had been spun out for the last 15 years because there was a financial arbitrage that could be built. Now as service companies are sort of, I'm not going to call them necessarily failing, but they're certainly hurting. And, when I look back to when I started in the Williston Basin in sort of the 2008-9 timeframe, there just weren't the services to support the activity up in the Williston because it had declined for so long. It seems like now is the time to start implementing more of the model that you're talking about, where you own a fuller range of things, including drilling rigs, not including drilling rigs. How do you think about the full supply chain integration for these majors as a survival technique now that prices have fallen?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I can tell you one thing, that what we look at is you have to be able to measure it first. We constantly measure the value of having our own equipment versus going to a third-party contractor and do that, because you have to answer that question every single month, month in and month out. Does this make sense or does this not make sense? And for going on for almost 4.5 years now, every single month, it's always made sense for us. Now we manage it properly as well. It's a lot more headache, a lot more work to manage your own services. That's not easy. But if you manage it right and you develop the right processes, it works. I think on the drilling side, if you're a company that actively drills, I used to own a directional drilling company that was based out of Denver. And we provided directional tools for a lot of different.
No, it was Payzone, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, and we shut it down. Luckily, we saw the rig count going this year, and we stacked it out. But I had always kind of preached that, some companies that have a full suite of like a package of wells, or it doesn't make sense to go buy a rig. You have to really look at your long-term economics and what makes sense. And then some companies just aren't set up to manage it. It's a lot of work, and you have to get a lot of experience to do it. And some people just fail miserably at it because they don't put the right people in place. But I'm a big proponent if it makes sense and you have good, strong management team. I think with a good, strong management team, you can do it. I think with a good process in place to measure it, to make sure that you track it and run it like a service business, but that service business is actually providing services for your company, and you can actually look at it on a month-to-month basis. I think it's great. There's another bigger oil company here in California that does it as well, and they've been really successful at it as well. They're a much larger independent than we are, and been able to do it on a larger scale. Even though, albeit a little bit different, they still basically do the same thing. They even drill for themselves because they have a continuous drilling program. And one thing that we've always realized with them is they can drill much cheaper. Now, at first, it wasn't that, it never works out that way at first, but eventually it sorts itself out after time.
So as you look at the upside and the continuing development, and you talked about EOR and CO2, what is it like to access CO2? Are there a lot of plants that generate CO2 in California? And then I think about gas pipelines being relatively short. It feels like some of the things you need for a successful EOR are challenged, and maybe that's what's been limiting the growth of Californian oil. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And obviously, you can't go institute CO2 in an old oil field. That doesn't work that way because of the nature of CO2 floods and the corrosive nature and then access to it. But that's been talked about a lot in California, carbon capture. How do we become part of the solution when it comes to, reducing greenhouse gas emissions? Now, I don't think anybody's put a really good pencil to it and actually figured it out. But I know some of the majors here have some big consolidated fields that make sense. So if you kind of are in a situation where you can kind of tee off that success and build out, like any kind of EOR, you have to start with the pilot and you have to work your way out. I mean, you're not just going to go in and full scale do it. But I think that, the infrastructure and the fields are there, and more on the light oil side in California for CO2. It's just going to take, some significant investment. And if the right majors controlled, and I want to say this carefully, the right majors control the right fields, I can see this as a very viable alternative. As you know, we have some companies in California that are stressed, that aren't able to invest in their infrastructure as much as they like. And I think if some of those things sort themselves out and either they get fixed or healthy and that comes to light, I can see a couple major oil fields in the state being really strong and been evaluated fully for CO2 to help implement that type of EOR in California. And then maybe we can link in the carbon capture at some point, but I'm not really sure how that's all going to work.
So one of the things that you mentioned really early on in our conversation was around the oil and gas being 7 of the top 10 taxpayers in Kern County, and that the second biggest product is ag. And I think that that's sort of missed a lot, is that a lot of the farming in Oklahoma, in Texas, in North Dakota, in Colorado has been really supported by taxation and mineral ownership of the minerals for farmers, so that it's almost like the farming is a loss leader, where it's the minerals that have really supported almost low food prices, because you can't exactly operate at a margin unless you have that bolster. What's that like, and is that a fair characterization? And as restrictions kind of come up, do you feel like the community supports you guys, or are they just quiet on it?
It's been a stressed relationship, I think, because a lot of the minerals here are split estate. So, Standard Oil came in initially, was a big player in California, and a lot of times they purchase the minerals and they'd sell the surface, and so you have a lot of that exists throughout the southern San Joaquin Valley, which is South Bakersfield area. And we have a lot of oil wells on prime ag land. And so I guess you see more, they're more like brush fires. You'll see it pop up in certain places and where you have an issue. We've always been really heavily intertwined with ag. We actually farm as well. That's one of the things that we do. We own a lot of land in Kern County. We have about 3,500 acres of land that we own here. So we can we see both sides. And it's just like any kind of normal relationship, but yet we don't have what you see occurring in the Rockies, and also in the Williston Basin, those places. These are new fields and new discoveries where the actual surface owner still owns the minerals. What we're dealing with is, century-old split estate issues where you're going in on somebody else's surface and they get virtually zero benefit from the production of the minerals. So and then typically we're paying, or some family members paying, their portion of the ad valorem taxes to the county. So it's not the same type of relationship you see in the Rockies. We have some wells that have 90 different owners. I mean, we'll have to deal with nightmares when it comes to what they call division orders, on a monthly basis, which we see opportunities in that too as well. I've got a lot of friends in the mineral business that buy minerals and do that too. And a lot of them always say California, they kind of secretly don't talk about how they like California, because when you have that much of the fragmented type minerals like that scattered throughout one place, it makes it a very opportunistic place to go acquire interest very easily. And we found that out to be the case as well. So different in a long-winded way, different than what you see happening in other parts of the country.
That's fair. So talk about your spacing. How these are all vertical wells? Is that not all vertical wells?
No, not necessarily.
I'm thinking about the older kind of stripper wells, but why don't you talk about the construct of the type of wells and the type of spacing? Because when you say we have a lot of land, 3,500 acres, I would say most people in the shale world would say 3,500 acres isn't a lot, but if it's 5-acre spacing, it's an unbelievable number of wells.
Sure. No, when I say that, that's what I'm saying is pure surface acreage ownership, and so that's not net mineral acreage or gross mineral acreage. We have several thousand acres of mineral acreage too as well that we lease and or own or whatever. But real estate in California is worth a little bit more than most places, and so we have a lot of ag land. And what I'm saying is, so some fields are like heavy oil, for example. We've got some fields in Kern County that have literally 0.25 acre spacing. We have a steam flood. You'll go to a field like the Kern River oil field or Midway Sunset or various places in Kern Front or Poser Creek around Bakersfield, and you'll see wells 15 feet away from each other, 20 feet away from each other. So they're directionally drilled mainly for avoidance. Some of our 5-acre pads are spacing on heavy oil. We'll put 6 wells in the 5-acre deal. Sometimes they'll go down to 9 wells in a 5-acre pattern. So our spacing is really tight in heavy oil, and just like anywhere else, more of a broader spacing for lighter oil fields, because we have a mix of them both here in Kern County. But yeah, I always take people to the Bluffs and Bakersfield, and I always take them to people from Colorado or Texas or any place that comes out and says, hey, look at this, and you'll see like literally a 70 square mile oil field with wells right on top of each other. And just you don't see that in very few places, and mainly heavy oil is where you'll see that at. So
you must have a really thick column to put enough crude in there. Plus your recovery factors are obviously extraordinarily high, so that helps. But talk about the dynamic of what these reservoirs are and thickness and types of API and what's going on.
We'll see in California, in different places in California, not necessarily Kern County, but we'll see API gravities as low as 7, 8. I mean, below 10. And then we have light oil production as well as high as 40 to 45 gravity. But on these heavy oil fields, you're looking at, these massive thick zones, sometimes 200, 300, 400 feet thick, 500 feet thick, 50, 60, sometimes 70% oil saturation. I mean, they're just completely saturated. On the western side of Kern County, you've got a rock called the diatomite, which is like kitty litter, basically. And it looks like a honeycomb when you look at it under a microscope, and it's just saturated with lighter oil. And they also EOR that too as well. So we've got California is relatively new geology versus old geology. Like many places in the country are more, if you look at the geological timetable of time, they're much older than what we are. We're very new and very faulted. Our valley here is like this big V, and it's this huge basin that has multiple types of objectives throughout it. So it's very, very broad, very different. We do have various types of wellbores. Like I have what's unique too on certain parts of Kern County. We produce oil synonymous with fresh water. So we have a part of our business is actually selling water. So we sell water to ag too as well. So we have a lot of, not a lot, but a handful of reservoirs here in Kern County that are actually synonymous with the freshwater reservoir. They actually are freshwater reservoirs. So we take out the oil, we filter out the water, and we provide much needed beneficial reuse water for a lot of various agricultural districts throughout the eastern part of Kern County. So we've become really close, in a close partnership with Ag2 here as well through, the mutual use of water.
How much does that water business support the oil business? If it wasn't for the water business from a profitability standpoint, does the oil work, or what goes on there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So on our main field where we do this, we produce 99% water. It's a 99% water cut. In most places where you'd have to pay to inject it, or put it through some sort of normal disposal system, it would never make sense. So that relationship is absolutely paramount to our business, and I think it's also paramount to the farmers in California too. Like the particular water district we sell to is heavily reliant on state water, that water that comes from Northern California. A lot of times they may only get 10%, 15%, or 20% of the normal allocations, which we help offset that significantly on an annual basis. So it's not only does it help the oil field become more profitable, it helps the agricultural district we're in or wherever else is occurring in Kern County get cheaper water, which is always good for a farmer. But it also reduces groundwater pumping. Mm-hmm. We see a lot of that. So it's a really strong partnership. And I think that, people always talk about like, what's the net water use of the oil industry? Well, in California, we're actually on the opposite side of that spectrum. We're actually positive water suppliers to the communities we live in. So I think we're really proud of that. We've been doing it for a long time. And we've also done more science on that, I think, than we've done on a lot of things. We've spent millions of dollars proving that it's safe and it makes sense. And it's taken us a long time to get to the point to get the public on board with that, but we finally have done that.
So maybe it's a political perspective that I have, but I've always kind of viewed California as a bit of an island. And when we talk about it, I mean, from the very physical, actual islands that have been built to produce oil, to the fact that there aren't oil pipelines, so therefore it has to import a lot more oil, to the fact that water use it's a huge ag state, and that it's been in a constant drought, so it's always fighting for water. And it's the world's sixth biggest economy, if I recall correctly. It feels like California is almost its own country. Does it feel like that living there?
Yeah, no, it really feels like we're way too big. The way our current governance is set up, we're very most populous state in the nation. It feels to me like, I've been here my whole life, that this place is just too big to govern under its current structure of government. And we see that. I mean, we look at our governor and say, man, this guy is drinking from a fire hose. And the amount of resources we have in place in the state to kind of govern it just aren't there. And you nailed it, man. We are definitely on an island. In so many different ways, we're on an island.
And did I read right, maybe it was a year or two ago, that there's always been talk about maybe changing the governance structure of California? I feel like it was maybe breaking it into 3 states, if I recall. Is that a thing? And as you think about the response to COVID and how there's different rural and there's urban and different cities and different demographics and north and south, and is that something you think will happen? And is there momentum behind that?
I wish it would. There's been various. There was like a 6 Californias plan, and then there was a Northern South California plan, which I think was a very viable one too. But it just never seems to get any traction. It takes the act of Congress in order to do something like that, and I think that's one of the things that really upsets the apple cart. What I liked about, there was one call, I believe it was 6 Californias or 7 Californias, I can't remember what it was, but it broke us all up into areas where it was kind of didn't affect the electoral college too much, it kind of kept everybody on the same page, but it never made it. But at some point, I'm not really sure what's going to be the trigger point. We are, as of this pandemic, we're now $54 billion in debt. We already have the highest income taxes in the nation. We have the highest gas prices in the nation. We have, in some parts of the state, are some of the most impoverished in the nation. Like in the valley here, we have a lot of communities that are very impoverished. Predominantly agricultural-based communities where you've got migrant workers that have come in, and they come in and out. So we've got a lot of major problems here that at some point, Silicon Valley can't hold us up forever. And, we just recently, I don't know if you saw with Tesla over the whole
I did.
mismanagement issue up in Northern California. They've threatened to leave California. And, obviously the most logical place would be Texas for them. But Toyota left California. A lot of companies are leaving California. And at some point when that tax base erodes and the way our society is going, something's going to have to happen.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've said coming out of COVID, and I'm glad you touched on that because I want to run this theory by you. It does feel like, I think about states like New York, I think about states like California. They're very big. They have high property taxes, they have high income taxes, and a lot of the benefits why people live in those cities are the theaters and the restaurants and the stadiums and the population and the, I think about Hollywood when I think about California, and I think about New York City when I think about New York. But it feels like there is going to be an exodus of people because to pay for the deficits and the debt and the state governments, you're going to have to cut social services and raise taxes, which it just feels like you're going to have an outflood of an emigration of people in California and New York to other states. Do you feel that or see it? And do people talk about that openly in California, or is that just sort of like don't ask, don't tell kind of policy?
No, there's definitely an exodus, and I just when my dad lives in Nevada, this personally hit me. I mean, my dad, when he retired, his first place he moved to was Nevada, and he brags to me, almost every day about how much less than taxes he pays than I do. So this is definitely something that's personal to me, and I don't know if they're measuring it at any point, but it's clearly evident to me that in our business, in the energy service business, that they're not coming back. But on the flip side of that, I look at that as an opportunity. And what I've been trying to preach to my partners, and as we all know, in our industry, we're going to have to struggle to get capital, and you're going to have to come up with some sort of creative way to do that. And I think in California, we can truly say, for those of us that have a good foundation here, and for those of us who know how to operate, this is a great opportunity. And we're seeing it here now, and we're seeing companies that have just said, we don't have the people to deal with this. We don't have the desire to deal with this. We don't know how. We don't want to deal with it anymore. And then we don't want the liability. So that creates a lot of opportunities for guys like me to go in and take over, grab up minerals really cheap. Those of us who know how to navigate the system, it gives us the ability to, really thrive here. So there's a flip side to that. So yeah, if you want to leave, that's great. I think there's also the opportunity that exists here as well.
Yeah. I mean, I love California, the weather, the lifestyle, everything about California, except for maybe the traffic, although COVID seems to have solved the traffic, no problem. What's the hobby of choice in Bakersfield?
We're real outdoorsy. I say that because we're surrounded by mountains. So we have the option to go to the beach. Everything is within 2 hours of Bakersfield. You can do anything. You go big city, you can go skiing within 3. Actually, you can go skiing within 2 here locally, but the big resorts are about 3.5 away. We've got lakes. There's a big outdoorsy community here, hunting, fishing type of community. We've also got a huge off-road community. I know my kid, I can't pull him off his dirt bike. Because we can ride, we have the space to do that here where you don't have that, anywhere throughout California. We have a huge rodeo community here also as well. So we're more of a Western type culture too. So you see a lot of that. Both of my daughters have the diversity of being in ballet and also doing rodeo, which is different. Where else do you see that? That's kind of a really unique culture. In fact, the head dancer for the New York City Ballet is actually from Bakersfield, if that says anything. So we do have an arts culture here as well. We have a huge country music background, so there's a lot of places to go watch country music here. Buck Owens, who was a famous country western singer, built this place called the Crystal Palace, which is like a museum. And it's unbelievable the amount of buses and tourists that all come to visit this place. It's like I don't know. I'm not like country music. I mean, Nashville to me is cool, but this place is like on that network, and we call it Nashville West.
Well, Naya, I was wondering when you said it was Midland West and Nashville West, I was trying to figure out how the Nashville tied in, but
You got Buck Owens, Merle Haggard, a lot of Dwight Yoakam here as well. I mean, it's just been a long line of country music people have come through. Buck Owens, when he was alive, would bring through. I mean, Garth Brooks proposed to his wife here in Bakersfield. It's crazy. I mean, we had this huge country music roots here that just was a lot of it because of Merle and Buck.
well, you talk about the difference between the big state government and how the state's almost impossible to govern because it's too diverse. And you have ag, you have oil, you have, I mean, entertainment. I can't even imagine. What is the lockdown? What is the current state of both the response to the lockdown in a place like Bakersfield and our restaurants reopening? Where are you at vis-a-vis the stay-at-home order, which, as I recall, Governor Newsom was the first governor in the country to announce, like, March 18th that California was going to have a stay-at-home order, and then everyone obviously followed California.
Yeah, well, we were deemed an essential industry, so we basically started social distancing, but we didn't shut down the oil and gas industry here in California.
Isn't that interesting that it was deemed essential even though it's hated? It's hated. We need someone to be angry at all the time. So those guys keep going to work.
Yeah, and the liquor stores too. They were
the riots would have started 2 months ago if they'd closed liquor stores.
Yeah, but yeah, no, it's been confusing. It's been chaotic. There's been I think, Reopen California was a movement that I saw started on social media and just exploded. And then we've watched obviously we watch politics really closely in California if you're in the oil and gas business. So we have folks that track social media and track what's going on. And, we used to have a governor that had a really high approval rating, and his approval rating has been severely damaged throughout this pandemic because I think the majority of Californians feel that he's mismanaged it. One of the big mistakes that he did early on was really cracking down on the beaches down in Southern California. That was like a, slap in the face to a lot of those folks that have been cooped up and really wanted to get out. And I mean, you can see it too. A lot of the photos, people were actually respecting distancing and doing the right things. But, he came out, aggressive and angry and got all paranoid over that whole thing. And that really disenfranchised him from a lot of Southern California folks. But I think overarching, I think Californians feel that it's been severely mismanaged. We have levels of opening up. Our county and various counties, based on some arbitrary statistics that he's made us have to meet, like rate of deaths per 1,000 or 100,000 rates of instances of infection, things that don't make any sense. Like, well, the more we test, the more we're going to find this disease or this virus. And so I think it's been so confusing. Then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we can open again. You've achieved level 2, but I don't think anybody really understands what that is. Which obviously it's a lot of what we face in energy, right? People always say, well, climate change this, and we shouldn't do it because of climate change, but they never really want to dive into the facts. And that's what these type of legislations are really good at. It seems like up north, it's just, kind of shielding us from the facts and just saying it's okay because, your economy has been destroyed. And if you don't get something going soon, you're going to have a real pandemic of economic proportions, which you already do on your hands right now. I don't know if I said that right. But.
Yeah, I mean, and it does seem it is going to be interesting, especially in an election year. And I think about one of the things about oil and gas is we respond to data. If a well isn't doing something, we do something else. And so we're constantly, even if we're wrong and we drill a well that we shouldn't have drilled, we learn from it and we immediately change the decision. And it does feel like, March 18th, California was the first to lock down. We didn't go through this whole, well, I mean, if masks are effective, why didn't you just say, carry on with your life? We encourage people to wear a mask, or, and now 2 months on, we're shutting down beaches and you're like, but I mean, it's outside and most people are asymptomatic. And we know that if you're over 65, you're at higher risk, but if you're under 14, you're at lower risk than the flu and school. It's really interesting. Do you think that in the 2020 elections, is this going to come back to hurt the Democrats? It feels like California is just like, are there even any Republicans that run? Like, do they just run because it's like they lost a bet at a dinner party and they're like, you're the Republican nomination candidate this go round?
I don't think that it's going to affect. In fact, there's a good article yesterday on the 2020 election, presidential election, that I don't think this. And I hate, you know what? I really hate politics. You got to the point where you have to get in this business. You know, I watched the evolution of this in Colorado. I kind of been, you know, because I do spend a lot of time in Colorado, and I watched I'm kind of was like reliving what we experienced in California, you know, a decade before. But I don't think there's going to be a lot. This election is going to be really strange. I mean, compared to others in the past. But I think most people, you know, have been more pragmatic when it comes to energy during these times. I think also they've been more pragmatic when it comes to politics. They're having to do things that are, you know, make sense, and they've been at home more. This is really going to change, I think, an election cycle this time. I'm not sure how it's going to affect future, but I don't think it's going to, when I say change, I don't think it's going to have a major effect. I think people are now just kind of more in the huddle down mode. I don't think energy is going to get hammered really hard this election cycle, more so like it has in the past. We've seen more relief in California over the last 3 months just because the regulators have everything else to focus on, right?
Right.
Okay, this isn't really an emergency. We need to focus on getting people healthy and getting our economy back going again. So they haven't hammered us in as much as they usually do. So I can't speak too much for presidential, but I do think this is going to be a better election cycle for energy for sure.
So last question for you, and it's more of a big picture one. If you could go back, you know, looking back on your career and everything you've done, if you could go back and tell your younger self something to help prepare you to be more resilient, or you know, make a different decision at some point, what advice would you have given yourself?
I would have not taken on as much debt. I mean, debt is always the most difficult thing in business to manage if you are in growth mode. And I think that, you know, I know that, and I've watched a lot of my peers, a lot of my friends who have taken private equity money and gone and built teams and done that, you know, a much better position than I think a lot of those guys are today. But I just really feel like there's something to be said. And now we're getting into a world where capital is going to be king. And I don't know how many people are going to be able to raise money like they used to be able to raise money. We've conventionally gone to friends and family and then local people in the community and outside the community that want to invest in oil and then come to us. But I think when you go out and if you take on too much debt, you're going to deeply regret it at some point in time. And this business is very difficult to manage. No matter, I mean, when you're fluctuating in price like we've seen in the last 10 years in this industry, yes, hedging is important and helped us and has saved us many a times. But I look back on my life, and if I didn't have debt ever, how much better it would be. I don't have to deal with a banker. No offense, bankers. I like you guys, but I didn't have to deal with a banker. I didn't have to deal with all the overhead associated with that. And I would have been just a little bit more patient with my growth cycle and not try to take over the world. I think that would make my life a lot easier. And I think that most businesses, you know, as much as you can model and as much as you can plan, you're a commodity-based business like this. If you're not hedged, you have a lot of debt, you're dead. And I think that's my biggest regret over time. I've had to fight in and out of that for years, and then, you know, finally get to a place where you're comfortable with it and you're healthy. It would have been much better if I was half the size with no debt.
I absolutely love that advice, and I think it's applicable across everyone's element of life. And we talk about credit card debt, car debt, house debt, and it's great in the upturns. It wipes you out in the downturns. And you think about 10 years of what you built, and to have it all taken away because you had 6 months where, you know, you couldn't survive. And I think restaurants are seeing that, hotels are seeing it, airlines are seeing it, and that is the biggest challenge, including state governments. Debt is the single biggest challenge that we'll face in the next 10 years. So I really appreciate you coming on. I loved hearing more about California and sort of visualizing driving around Bakersfield with you, which I will now start calling Nashville West.
Okay.
So thanks so much for joining us. As always, you can catch up on our old podcast. This was, if you can believe it, this was episode 50 of the Hot Take of the Day podcast. We have pounded out 50 of these. I think we've covered a really wide range of topics. If there's anything that you want to hear about, please, you can always email me, text me. My numbers are out on social media as the only person who does that. Write a review if you like what you hear. And until next time, be safe, be good, have a great day.